Hello everyone, my name is Jade, and this is the first episode of the Octopus Literary Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be going over the first 3 chapters of Old Man's War by John Scalzi. I don't know anything about this book going into it. I didn't read the back of the book. The only thing I know is that several people have recommended that I read it. So, yeah, I'm just going to dive in. So, the first thing we see when we open the book is this opening paragraph that's very short that says, "I did 2 things on my 75th birthday. I visited my wife's grave, then I joined the army." So this isn't really a first sentence, but it serves as a first sentence. And it packs a whole lot of information in just those 3 sentences. This is a masterful first sentence for a book. We learned that the protagonist is 75, and aging and issues for the elderly are the frontmost set of themes for this book, and I assume the rest of the books in the series, which I don't know anything about. We know that he's a family man, he has a wife, and that his wife is dead, and that he's joining the military, which is pretty obvious. But it's an unexpected revelation to anyone who hasn't read the back of the book, especially because he just said that he's 75. So basically, this first sentence sets up the tone as being unconventional and surprising, but still very connected to the protagonist's sense of humanity. He's still thinking about his wife all the time. So the first thing that happens is the actual description of him visiting his wife's grave. We learn quite a bit about his family. We actually don't learn his name until much farther into the story, so I'm going to avoid using his name just to highlight how long we don't know this about him. So first, he travels to the actual cemetery. He mentions that his son is the mayor. And we spend a really strangely long amount of time talking about the woman who his wife, Kathy, is buried next to. This woman, Sandy, was in this long drawn out feud with Kathy over just weird stuff over the course of their lives, random things. But at the end, Sandy died, and her husband ran off with a porn star. So he considers that he considers Kathy, his wife, to have had the last word in their feud, because Kathy has people visiting her after she has died. Where no one has visited Sandy, and in fact her husband has married someone else. So that sets us up for one of the major themes of the story, which is that John is a person who cares about the connections to other people first and foremost. It doesn't matter how pretty your headstone is, because Sandy's headstone is prettier than Kathy's. What matters is that your son comes to see you after you've died. Also, we mentioned that Sandy's husband sent a postcard where he mentions that he is with where he's living with a former porn star, and it says that the protagonist feels unclean for a week after getting that bit of information. This lets us know early on that our protagonist is a gentleman. He values loyalty and sort of conventional lifestyle, and that he doesn't really subscribe to any of the values of a person that you would consider trashy. Then we learn Kathy's full name, Catherine Rebecca Perry, which isn't particularly remarkable except for the fact that we only learn the protagonist's last name by knowing his wife's last name. So we still don't know what his first name is. It's all about her. It's all about her and his son, and the fact that his son is the mayor, and the fact that his wife was a kind person. Skipping ahead a little bit, he mentions that he hates that her last words were, "Where the hell did I put the vanilla?" And we're basically stating here another one of the major themes of the story, and maybe of John's character. John, I accidentally said the protagonist's name, my bad. Is the idea that life and death are meaningless without the value that you imbue into it through a life well lived. Yeah. Kathy's death is just a sudden thing that happens on a Sunday morning, but it's the effect that her death has that matters. He also mentions that a person after they die goes to heaven or hell or wherever or nowhere, which is shorthand for telling us that our protagonist is agnostic, which is interesting considering the fact that he's 75 and most people have figured out where they stand on that by that time. But it's realistic. People are like that. He mentions that he always thought it was strange that people visited graves after a person was dead, because the person themselves, the person is not there. It's just their corpse. But then he says, after losing his wife, he didn't care that it was just her corpse. It's what he has. And I brought this up because this is the first beat in a whole lot of beats we're going to have in these 3 chapters, about this sense of desperation because you've lost everything that you loved in your life and you'll settle for anything, even if it's no actual value to you. So I summed this up as life as a war of attrition as a major theme for the first, at least, part of the story. Then a little bit later we get the line, "It's easier to miss her at a cemetery where she's never been anything but dead than to miss her in all the places where she was alive." And not only is that a really nice way of summing up how heartbroken he still is over his wife's death, which happened 8 years ago, but also it tells us a little bit that our protagonist has a bit of a poetic streak. He thinks about his emotional effect, the way he's been emotionally affected by her death. So then we get a section break, and he says, although, come to think of it, signing up for the army wasn't all that dramatic either. And I brought this up because this is an interesting way of, basically, this and a line at the beginning indicate that this book is being written as some kind of memoir by a John in the future. He's talking about what he did think. He's talking about what he thought at the time. I'm not sure if anything will actually come of this, or if at the end of the book we'll find out that he was writing this in his journal and then he closed the book. But yeah, it's just something to keep an eye on. If nothing happens with this, it's just a fun little character beat about the way that John speaks. The protagonist. Because we still don't know his name. So then the protagonist travels to the Army recruiting office, where he says that he's been in here 10 years before when he originally signed up, or signed a paper saying that he was interested in joining the military. And he says nothing has been moved. It says, the human appeared to be new. At least, I don't remember the previous recruiter having that much hair or breasts. The interesting thing here, and this is just kind of a throwaway line, but he says not having that much hair or breasts, and it never comes up again. Like a lot of times with protagonists, you get particularly lecherous thoughts, or the way they might describe the secretary in weird ways or interact with her disrespectfully, but even though he noticed her breasts, he just drops it. He treats her with the utmost respect. She says later that all the people who come in try to proposition her, but he doesn't. He has an absolute commitment to being a gentleman. He recognizes that, yes, she has breasts, but he's just a nice guy. Then we move on. The secretary says, it stands to reason that you're John Perry. And this is the first time we actually hear the protagonist's name. He hasn't thought about himself at all. We don't know what his job was. We don't know if he's been working and he retired. We don't know what his favorite color is. We don't know how tall he is or what he looks like. This other person had to tell us what his name is That's how not concerned he is with himself and how concerned he is with other people. Then what happens is he tries to make a joke, and she just doesn't get it. Not doesn't get it, but she doesn't react at all. And this is the first of a long line of beats in these 3 chapters where he just tries to get people to laugh. He's not trying to be manipulative. He's just trying to be friendly. And that's the way that he interacts with people throughout all the book that I've read so far. He just tries to make people happy. But she shuts him down. It says there was not even the barest hint of a smile when she said this. And this kind of introduces this theme that the military is going to shut down his sense of humor or his self. In our military today, we think of the military as molding you into a person who you will be for the rest of your life. But John Perry is already a person. He's a person who has lived a full 75-year life already. And changing who he is now is worse somehow. There's a difference between the idea of changing a boy into a man and changing a man into a soldier. Or rather, a soldier, but in this case, a recruit. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. I want to know whether the military is going to stamp the humor out of John Perry, or whether he will continue to be this nice man. So then he talks about what the recruiting process has been so far, and he mentions that the only people he's ever spoken to about joining the CDF, which is the Colonial Defense Force, have been representatives who are not actually part of the CDF. And this was a huge red flag for me, like the moment I heard this in the audiobook. It's been completely impossible for anyone who has not been to space to speak to someone who has been to space, basically. There's no one who is going to actually inform these elderly people who are signing up for the military as to what they're actually going to be doing. And we'll get back to this in a minute. It says that John took a brief medical exam, which consisted of taking blood, swabbing the inside of my cheek to dislodge some cells, and giving him a brain scan. The interesting thing about that I noticed is that attention to detail, none of these are about his physical fitness. They're all about his brain ability, which we know from later cannot be improved by science in this book, and his DNA and blood quality. If he's going to be given a new body, these are things that matter, but stuff like can he do jumping jacks are not the kinds of things that we test for. So I just thought that was a neat detail. Later on, we hear mention of something called the quarantine laws. This is basically the reverse prime directive of this universe. It's not that the humans can't tell people anything. It's that nothing can be told to the humans. If you go into the military, you cannot write letters home, and you cannot send them pictures of the aliens you encountered. We find out later that there's no information available to the public about what the colonies are like. And this is a giant red flag. Why would you not want the population of Earth to know what is going on in space? Because you have something to hide. I mean, there's no two ways about this. There's something insidious going on. And I don't know what it is, but it's bad. It's really bad. So then we get to a part of the contract, which right now John is signing this contract for what he is and isn't going to be doing in the Colonial Defense Force. We get to this paragraph where he says, where the contract says, I may not, during the term of my service, refuse to bear and use arms as ordered, or cite religious or moral objections to such actions in order to avoid combat service. This is another giant red flag, because in real life, when someone decides whether they are going to join the military, they typically take into consideration things like, do I agree with this war? Do I actually think we should be beating these people up? And then, if you are a conscientious objector, it's because you know the situation and you say, hey, I really don't think we should be in this war. I am going to not participate. These people are signing up, and then they have no opportunity to say, I don't think this is right, even though they have no knowledge of what the war is going to be like going in. They don't know why they're fighting. They don't know who they're fighting. They don't know if they're going to be ordered to go in and kill humans. So yeah, this is bad. Especially because John is such a nice person. I feel like where we're going with the story is that John is going to be ordered to do something he doesn't want to do, and he's not going to be able to say no. And we're going to see what happens when that comes up. At this point, I feel like it's inevitable. So we skip through a couple other paragraphs when we get to, I consent to whatever medical, surgical, or therapeutic regimens or procedures are deemed necessary by the Colonial Defense Forces to enhance combat readiness. And this, according to John, is the reason why all these old people are going gaga over joining the CDF. Because they think that joining the Colonial Defense Force is their ticket to getting a new body, a new young body. And it cannot fix their brain. John says that they have no ability to work on brains in this future. But at least you're not dealing with stuff like heart problems, arthritis. But let's listen to this phrasing again. I consent to whatever medical, surgical, or therapeutic regimens or procedures are deemed necessary by the Colonial Defense Forces to enhance combat readiness. There is nothing in this statement that indicates that John will be becoming young again. And this is the full and total extent of the proof that they have that any de-aging occurs in the CDF. And that's another giant red flag. All of these old people are joining because they think that this one sentence means that they will be getting younger. And you know what? Maybe they will get younger. But this one sentence is the reason for this whole book. Anyway, moving on. We get John's particular reason for joining. He says, then you're 75, friends are dead, and you've replaced at least one major organ. You have to pee 4 times a night, and you can't go up a flight of stairs without being a little winded. And you're told you're in pretty good shape for your age. So it's this idea of wearing somebody down over time, and John just wants it to end. He's the frog that's been boiled. Yeah, he doesn't want to live like this anymore, and he's willing to leave his planet to do so. Yeah, so later on we get another mention of the CDF puts no effort into recruiting whatsoever. They just say, if you want to find out how they make people young again, you have to sign up. If the CDF is ordered to leave any country, old people will just fly to a country where it's still legal to join there and join anyway. Because all these old people just desperately want to be young again, and it's enough of the norm that they're mostly not questioning whether this is actually going to happen or whether this is going to be good for them. I, a new observer, think this sounds shady, but these people don't think it's shady because it's normal now. We get a mention that the residential franchise that allows humans to reside on planet Earth if they give this up, they cannot return to Earth. John is giving it up because he's joining the CDF. Later on, we get a mention that there is no way to communicate with Earth from the colonies, and the CDF has a really great excuse for why they can't, which is it's too far, and all of the big antennas need to be used for military reasons, so the general population cannot use the actual communication array for any reason. And I know I've been a little bit paranoid about the CDF so far, and I'm trying to give them a fair chance, but I'm calling bullshit. It's impossible to me that there is no enterprising young postman who is going to build his own communications array to be able to charge people to write letters to home, for the simple reason that there has to be enough demand to write letters back to your family or get new episodes of Game of Thrones shipped across to the colonies. There is no possible way that there isn't enough demand to build another communication array with Earth, even if it takes a year or so to get messages across. I'm gonna go with the CDF is blocking communications for 1,000. Yeah. Then I just pulled out the sentence that says, "It's a hell of a thing to say goodbye to your whole life. I signed." That's a summary of this chapter. That's what this chapter is. Then John signs that he will be considered legally dead. In the eyes of the law, they will just move ahead with whatever is written in his will, divide up his things among his one children. I brought this up because it brings this image of John and all the other people signing up for the CDF dying and being born again. So, yeah. Then later on, the secretary mentions that the work is okay and the pay is surprisingly good considering how little money they've put in to decorate around. Anyway, you're going to join an organization you've never met. Doesn't that bother you? No, I admitted. I'm old, my wife is dead, and there's not much reason to stay here anymore. Are you going to join when the time comes? So, the CDF spends a lot of money, as the secretary says, paying her, but never letting anyone who's ever been to space talk to anyone who has never been to space. And then John says, I'm old, my wife is dead, and there's not much reason to stay here anymore, which just highlights how the CDF is recruiting from the desperate. John is a desperate, hopeless person, and it just makes the CDF come across as kind of predatory. Like, I really hope that they have good, altruistic reasons for doing what they do. But I haven't seen any evidence of that so far. I know we're only on page 18, but yeah, I'm suspicious. We get a mention of something called a beanstalk, which is a way of shooting people up into the sky. I thought that was just a really neat name. Pretty clever of John Scalzi to come up with something that was it just communicates the idea perfectly with no confusion, and it's quite succinct, so nice. So then, right as John is leaving and has signed all of his papers, he makes one more joke, and the secretary gets it. So that's showing us that despite the fact that this representative of the military has been rejecting his self the whole time, she's not... and in the end, John's personality and good humor prevails over the soul-suckingness of the military. And I think that's going to be a nice... I think that's going to be how this book is. The military will try to take away John's sense of humor and altruism, but ultimately he will prevail as a human. And then as he leaves, he tells a joke to the next woman coming in, and it says, "She smiled as she figured it out. Finally, I made someone smile that day. Things were looking up." So that just sums up John's character. He's visited his wife's grave. Apparently, we find out later, he just visited everyone else he has ever met to say goodbye to them. But things are looking up because he made one stranger smile. John's a nice guy. Then we move on to chapter 2. And if chapter 1 was about who is John, chapter 2 is about why do the various members of the CDF recruits join the CDF. So we start out with the line, "Nairobi was launched from underneath us," which is just neat wording. As the humans are being loaded, well, I don't know why I said humans, elderly humans are being loaded onto this donut-shaped ship and launched up into space on the beanstalk. And John has gotten himself into an excruciating friendship with this guy named Leon Deek. So remember all those nice things that John said about literally everyone he's ever met in his entire life? Yeah, so listen to his description of Leon Deek. "So Leon would not find himself making a sudden and entirely unexpected return to the earth's embrace. More is the pity. Leon had attached himself to me in Chicago like a fat, brat and beer-filled tick. I was amazed that someone whose blood was clearly half pork grease had made it to age 75. This is the nicest thing he says about Leon the whole chapter. Anyways, really dislikes this guy. It's because Leon just never shuts up and has like no emotional intelligence whatsoever, which is the exact opposite of John in every way. He's a quiet guy who's extremely emotionally intelligent. It says at some point, John wanders off counterclockwise in the general direction of the restrooms, but more specifically to see if I could find a place where Leon might not find me. In other words, this is the person that John has probably come closest to hating in his entire 75-year life. And he still cannot stand up to him. He's still nice and kind of a doormat and a pushover. It's kind of endearing. And we'll come back to this in a minute. John describes the platform as being similar to the lobby of a Pleasant Economy hotel, which is, at first I was kind of confused as to why we got this, but later on in the chapter they describe that the other way of getting to space is through a traditional rocket launch, right? Lots of G's, lots of stress on the passengers. This Pleasant Economy hotel lobby ship is to not kill the elderly recruits. Probably a lot of these people with major health issues would not survive the launch to space, particularly because it seems a lot of them have joined because they have major health issues that they're looking to have cured. So yeah, just an interesting detail. John says that everyone is sad that you leave when you leave for the military, but, quote, they know that somewhere out there you're still alive. This isn't really the case. You could go out there and, you know, have a heart attack your first day and your family will never know. If you accomplish great military feats, they'll never know either. Yeah, I haven't decided how I feel about this concept yet. I'll get back to you in a later episode. So then John talks about all the visits that he made to the various people that he loved in life. In particular case, in a couple of cases, it says, "A couple of times I asked forgiveness for things I didn't particularly feel sorry about. And in one case I found myself in bed with someone who otherwise I'd rather I hadn't. But you do what you have to give people closure." So for one, it's noble that he's giving himself and these other people closure by giving them forgiveness and so on. And, you know, not carrying those weights into his next life as a military soldier. But just highlighting I found myself in bed with someone who otherwise I'd rather I hadn't. This is just another example of how John is kind of a doormat. He is manipulated into apparently having sex with someone he has no desire to have sex with, just to make them feel better. That's kind of the doormat, yeah. We then learn the most interesting thing in this chapter, by far, which is that John protested what was called the Subcontinental War. Apparently, he and his wife taught their son that violence is never the answer and that guns are bad. This is, I wrote, red flag of the century. So kind, empathetic, loving John is a conscientious objector and a protester of war, and he's putting all of that aside for the CDF, and he has no idea what he's getting into. He has no idea at all. He protested war previously, and he has signed away his ability to question any orders. This is not going to go well. Then what happens is John escapes Leon for a significant amount of time, but then he overhears that some poor helpless woman has been pulled into a conversation with Leon, and it says, "My sense of chivalry overcame my desire to hide." In other words, John cannot stand up for himself against anyone unless he is defending another person. And that kind of shows us a glimpse of what John is probably going to act like in the military. He's not all about self-preservation, but he is about protecting other people. And that's an admirable quality, for sure. So what this conversation is a debate between a woman, who we find out is named Jessie, and Leon. And they're debating a war that apparently the United States was in with India a few years ago, where we being the United States, ended up nuking New Delhi and Mumbai. That's a lot of people, particularly in the future. We're probably talking about somewhere around 1 billion people there if population continues to grow. And I'm saying somewhere around 1 billion, including probably whatever else happened during that war. That's a huge amount of people. Okay, maybe 500 million. But Leon says that because we won, the winning should count for something. Basically, as an apology for winning this war, for being nuked, Indian people are the colonists who are being sent out to the new planets to populate them. So anyone of any age in India can go on to the next planet. And so anyone of any age from India can go on to the next planet, but Americans can't. And Leon hates this. He thinks that because the United States won, Americans should be allowed to colonize the planets and not Indians. He says, quote, "Winning should count for something." This pissed me off hugely. This is excruciatingly slimy. Because, for one, even if the nuke was necessary to end the fighting, it's not something to be celebrated. Whoop-de-doo, we killed 500,000 people. That's horrible. It might have been necessary, but you shouldn't feel good about it. But the real thing that I hated about this is that Leon is not a veteran. He did not fight for America in this war. But he's an entitled whiner, and he wants to reap the rewards of the people who actually did fight in this war. So he's like, I was born in America, therefore I should have the right to colonize whatever planet I want. What? You didn't do anything. You probably sat at home without contributing. Thanks, I hate it. So then Jessie and John. So Leon brings out a Bible quote, which is "The meek will inherit the earth," and he basically says this means that the Indians are the meek, and they should have to inherit the earth and not the stars. So what follows is Jesse and John giving Leon a glorious verbal beatdown using only Bible quotes to show him that he has no idea what he's talking about and he's just being a bigot. This is also some really important and cool characterization for Jessie. She's knowledgeable, for one. She can recite Bible verses off the cuff, but also she is not a doormat like John. She pulls John into the argument and gives him the encouragement that he needs to be able to participate. She will say what she means, and you will listen to her back it up with facts. And I like her. So then we find out that the reason why Leon hates Indian people is because one of them shot off one of his son's balls. Now it stinks. It stinks that his son lost one of his balls. But one, he is still alive. And two, you can still father children with a single ball. Yeah, you'll probably have to take some hormone therapy for the rest of your life, but it's less inconvenient than losing, say, a kidney. But more importantly, 2 of the most populous cities on the planet got nuked, and he's butthurt about his son losing one of the least vital organs in his body. I hate this guy. Then Leon says that he hates the fact that he's going to have to protect the Indians in the colonies, which tells us that the whole goal of this project is to protect the Indian people that are the colonists. So this is horrible. This makes Leon horrible because it means he wants the reward from the war of being able to be young. He wants the reward of joining the CDF, which is being able to be young again, without putting in the work of protecting the colonists, which is their only job. And he wants the reward of being able to join the colonists without the work of fighting in the war that he links this to meaninglessly. There's no connection between these 2 things. So yeah, screw this guy. So finally, John ends the conversation with basically reciting a section of the Sermon on the Mount at Leon, which drives Leon off. And so it says that with a bit of a push, John is capable of fighting back. So he's not some doormat. I mean, he is kind of a doormat in his own. If it's him, that's the concern, but if it's important, he can't stand up to others. So that's good. So then he has a real introductory conversation with Jesse, where we learn that Jesse is from Texas, and she grew up thinking that these wild television and book legends about the colonies were true and that she would want to move to the colonies when she got older. Then she found out that they have no information about what the colonies are like. And there's no way for her to join the colonies until she turns 65. So she was disappointed. And she apparently she learned a bunch of Bible verses and was good at memorizing them when she was in high school. And she asks how John knows the Sermon on the Mount, and he says that, "I lived in a town of 2,000 people and 15 churches. It helped to be able to speak the language." In other words, John is agnostic. He doesn't know what he thinks about religion, but he learned the entire Bible so that he could talk to people better. John's a nice guy. So we learn a little bit more about exactly what Jesse's deal is with, reading these legends about the colonists and stuff. And I just think this is a really cool character concept, and I'm glad we have it in this story because I'm sure basically everyone reading this book can relate to the idea of wanting to explore the solar system and having to face the reality that you may not be able to do it. And I'm happy for Jessie to be able to experience this now. Even if you're like me, who can't really relate to the life as a war of attrition story of getting old quite yet, I can definitely relate to Jessie's idea of wanting to explore the solar system and, you know, not feeling like you will ever be able to do so. I just like this character. Then we find out that she was supposed to go to Italy, but then it turned out that her husband cheated on her with his secretary, and they went to Italy. This is code in book for Jessie is single. She's the only female we've seen so far who's John's age, and I think there's reason for that. Then she mentions that she has never left Texas at all, and she wishes that she had taken more trips in her life, because the only plane she's ever been on was from Dallas to Nairobi this morning, and she wishes she had traveled more. And I wrote, Jessie is an audience insert for the science fiction nerd who never leaves their house. Then we're introduced to a new character, Harry Wilson. Harry Wilson is a former high school physics teacher. We're going to see a lot of him, but the sum of his character is he really enjoyed being a high school physics teacher. He used to work for General Electric, but he lost his job and became a teacher instead. And he's very cynical. He's not so cynical that it's exhausting to read, but he's way less altruistic than wide-eyed Jessie or unstoppably kind John. So he makes a nice third side to this triangle that just kind of keeps it from feeling like happy fun times all the time. Not that I really want to spend too much time hearing why things suck from his perspective. After a couple pages of Science Gab, Harry gets around to saying that the humans have to have stolen the technology for the beanstalk from aliens. And I'm really glad we got this out of the way, because the moment somebody mentioned they didn't know how the beanstalk worked, it was obvious to me and probably everyone else who has ever read a science fiction book in their life that they got the technology from the aliens. And a lesser book would probably draw this out until the end, where it's a plot twist that we're using the technology of the aliens, but we just told us. Scalzi just told us right off the bat, and I really like it when authors respect their audience, and I appreciate that he does it here. But we do bring in a new question, which is, why haven't they shared this technology with the rest of the humans? And this is another red flag. What is the CDF hiding? Why don't they want us to know about this technology? Why don't they want us to know about what they are doing in colonies? Red flags all around. So then we get this line from Harry where, and I laughed at this line. So listen to this line outside of the context of what Harry is talking about the beanstalk. This beanstalk exists to tell us that much. It's bigger and stranger than we can imagine, and it's just the first part of this journey. What comes next is going to be even bigger and stranger. Prepare yourself as best you can. This is the author speaking directly to the audience. The first part of this journey is them riding around on the beanstalk, but the rest of the book will be bigger and stranger, and prepare yourself. Alright, so that's chapter 2. Moving on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is about the sort of elephant that's been in the room the whole time, which is the elderly military recruits' general giddiness to join the military. They've all had this almost weirdly optimistic view of what they're going to be doing out there. Some of them seem to have a better idea, or some of them seem to have faced the idea that they might be committing acts of violence and seeing horrific things, doing horrific things, dying immediately. more than others. This chapter focuses largely on that. In fact, the very first section, or the very first paragraph of the chapter is, I don't know about you two, Jesse was saying to me and Harry, but so far this isn't really what I expected the army to be. I feel like that's what they're going to be saying for the rest of the book after the events of this chapter. So they arrive at the space station where they're going to be spending the next couple of days as they approach the next stage of their military life. And so they arrive on this ship, which is called the CDFS Henry Hudson. They're fed even more coffee and donuts, which is becoming almost a running gag at this point. Every mention of every meeting with the CDF has been with coffee and donuts. The children, and by children I mean the elderly recruits, are herded across the platform where they are trying to see into space and trying to see all the other cool ships around, and they're just pushed along. It says, I felt like plopping down on the floor and having a tantrum until I got my way. Basically, they're using a lot of childish verbiage to describe their feelings about being on this ship, which reflects the excitement of space, but also contrasts a lot with what they're actually here to do. As they walk by a bar, they see, it's a small, nice area. They see, quote, something tentacled in blue. So there are actually aliens. Well, they knew there were aliens, but there are aliens that the Earth humans know about. This is called a Gehar, which is, the blue tentacled thing. The only thing we know about them now is that they eat by injecting their food with acid from dozens of thin head tentacles and then noisily slurping the resulting goop into an orifice. Messy. It says Harry didn't care. He'd spotted his first live alien. So another beat of Harry just being excited about science, excited to discover things, going back to his roots as a physics teacher for high schoolers. So then they move on to talk about the fact that this ship has actual artificial gravity as opposed to spin gravity, which is what most ships are using, because apparently it takes a whole lot of energy to be able to produce true artificial gravity, something that is reserved for very few uses, and so they come to the conclusion that the CDF must have either found a power source that can keep the gravity on and still run all the ship's other systems like propulsion and life support, or they found a new low energy way to create gravity. But if they did find a new low energy way to create gravity, why wouldn't they put this on the rest of the ships? The Henry Hudson is the only one they could see with artificial gravity. So they come to the conclusion that there is some crazy, probably alien power source that is powering the ship. That is probably, like I said, alien, so they don't understand it. And that will definitely come back later. So I'm just noting it here. They're each given a PDA to carry with them. So, I mean, obviously cell phones won't work in space, but they reference this a lot later. Well, they reference this very frequently later in the chapter, so just noting that this is where they get it. John tries to make a joke to the CU official who gives him the PDA, and the guy doesn't get the joke. But even after, so John was just complaining about having to wait 18 hours to get here, and how he was exhausted and wanted to take a nap. Even after 18 hours of waiting, he still wants to be nice and friendly and tell jokes. They're all put on this shuttle and which has no artificial gravity or spin gravity of any kind, and they're told to vomit into bags. And everybody actually listens instead of being proud, which is nice. It says, there was no vomit, thankfully, and the ride to the Henry Hudson was pretty smooth. After the initial shit, I'm falling signal my brain shot out when the gravity gave way, it was more like a gentle, extended roller coaster ride. This is just another use of childish phrasing to describe this whole military field trip. Talking about roller coaster rides and so on. They finally have an official looking guy come out to talk to them about exactly what they're going to be doing in the next couple days. And you start to get interested. You're like, oh yeah, finally a real live person from the CDF. It's actually not another, it's another person who is not actually from the CDF. He's a member of the Colonial Union, which appears to be some kind of Earth-based organization, and he's just speaking on behalf of the CDF. So, still no CDF officials to be found. We're in chapter 3. We are 1/6 of the way through the book. So he tells them that for the next couple days they're going to be going through an orientation, and they're going to be going through an orientation, doing a couple of evaluations, that kind of thing. And you know, basic orientation stuff. And that they've each been assigned roommates, which they will have for the next couple of days until they arrive at, I'm not sure, but I will bring it up. I'll bring it back up when we pass the exact location. I pulled out this one thing. It says, Campbell stopped for a second. Campbell is the guy who's talking to them, and gave us all what I think he thought was a significant stare. I just thought that was interesting phrasing. I think that John doesn't find anybody, I think that John doesn't find anybody intimidating, particularly someone who's younger than him. Not that he disrespects anybody, but he sees everyone as approachable. Even Leon, who he wouldn't stand up to, he didn't find intimidating. So yeah, it doesn't even extend to this guy. Then they're told that they can go observe the recession of the Earth from the back of the ship. Well, from a camera that will be projected onto a screen. He says, this will probably be your last chance to see what was your homeworld. If that means something to you, I suggest you drop by. So before going to the observation deck, John stops off at his room and finds that his roommate is Leon Deek, the whiny little bitch from the last chapter. And apparently he says to John when he sees him, oh look, it's the Bible freak, and then studiously ignored me. I just wanted to point out that one, Leon was the one who brought up the Bible verses, so yeah. Two, he's ignoring John, which is actually what he wanted. So John got what he wanted, but also this is the only person who I feel like we're going to see in this whole book, other than maybe an antagonist, who John actually would want to ignore. He's just such a friendly dude. So he, Harry, and Jesse watch the recession of Earth from the platform. Well, not from the platform, from this atrium that they're standing in. And at one point John says, you can still die, you know. I said, you are joining the military. Yeah, but I'm not going to die old, Harry said. I'm going to have a second chance to die young and leave a beautiful corpse. It makes up for missing out on it the first time. I just thought this was an interesting quote, because this is the first time anyone in the group has mentioned anything about this experience being anything but a fun time. Death doesn't bother them at all. Death doesn't bother them, but they're not talking about the possibility of any other bad things that could occur either. So that brings up something that I realized about this whole story concept, and that is that this dilemma, would you join the military for the chance to be young again? It's not a question of whether you would die to be young again. It's a question of whether you would kill to be young again. These are people who already know they're going to die soon, and that's not their biggest concern. So many of these citizens, the ones who have joined the CDF, have decided that they will kill to be young again, and you know, they have no altruistic reason to join this war. They're not trying to protect the colonists because they don't know what they have to protect the colonists from, and they don't understand what they're going to find when they get there. They just know that they are willing to do anything, even things that could be horrible, either to other species or our own, in order to have this youth. So then they actually watch the Earth pull away on the screen, and it says that John sees Harry be quiet and reflective when he's usually very boisterous, and Jessie has a tear on her cheek. We don't actually know what, or rather, we don't actually see what John's reaction is, but we know what it is, right? Jessie cries and Harry gets quiet, but John looks to others in this time. Just another beat in this long line of John is a person who's extremely centered around other people and how they're feeling. The following morning, so they are going to a place called Beta Pixis. That's where they're headed. So John wakes up the following morning to go to breakfast. He puts on a recruit's uniform that appeared in his wardrobe overnight, and he tries to wake up Leon, but Leon refuses to go. In fact, Leon is actually very rude to him, and we'll get back to this in a minute. He goes down to breakfast and sees that the breakfast is just over the top lovely, extremely extravagant. The recruits say that they believe this is because the recruits are probably feeling some shade of bad because they just left all their family behind. They're probably dead tired. They're probably extremely tired. They feel horrible. So this is the CDF's attempt at giving them something, which is nice. It's not all horrible times yet. Speaking about the food, John says, "I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Since I was now officially legally dead on Earth and flying across the solar system in a spaceship, I guess I wasn't too far off." John meets a guy named Thomas Jane, who, not the actor, who used to be a physician in his past life, and he is conning everybody out of their breakfast because he doesn't want to go back and get seconds by telling them that whatever they're eating is extremely unhealthy for them and that they shouldn't eat it, so that they give it to him. I feel like we'll probably see this guy again. So even after somebody else warns John about the scam that this is, John still gives Thomas the waffle. He's just a nice guy. During this, they joke about the waffles being grenades to fall on, and how taking the waffle is a selfless act akin to falling on a grenade. And it's just another example of these people being totally blasé about their own deaths. They don't care. They're just here to have a good time and eat some delicious waffles. John meets Harry's roommate, Alan Rosenthal. I'm sure this guy will come back up because we get his last name. but the only thing we really know about him so far is that he was asleep last night during the pulling away of Earth, so he probably doesn't have that much connection to, or he doesn't feel like he has that much connection to Earth or whatever it was that he left behind, if he left anything behind. Either that or he's just not a very sentimental guy. So Harry mentions that the roommate lottery turned out badly for John, but I'm actually a little bit suspicious, and maybe this is paranoia, but so Harry, the physics teacher, got paired with a PhD in physics, a physicist, and I'm wondering if the roommate assignments were purposeful, and John and Leon were paired up because Leon is insufferable, and John was the only person who would probably be able to tolerate him without stabbing him. Maybe I'm totally off there, but I'm just wondering if maybe that was the case. It doesn't make sense that they would, because it's only for like 3 days, but I just thought it was a massive coincidence that Thomas and Harry were rooming together, and they're both physicists, so yeah. So then we get to the most interesting discussion of this chapter, which is where Thomas starts to talk about the fact that he's not sure that the CDF is actually going to make them young again. It would be incredibly expensive and difficult to do so. That it would make more sense for them to just clone a bunch of organs and replace them as needed and do some basically touch-up work on the bodies so that they could so that the soldiers are better able to handle the environment and better able to handle the combat. Which is a terrifying idea, right? You go to space. Yeah, imagine that this is the surprise you get after leaving your family behind, the opportunity to become young again. Nothing, but at least you get to be ordered around by somebody else. So you don't get to be young again, and you came here for no reason. If Thomas is right, and it's entirely possible that he's not right, but all signs so far have pointed to there's something up with the promises that are being made. Somebody brings up, actually it's Thomas, brings up that maybe all the other intelligent species in the universe are pushovers, which is why they can afford to have old people fighting them that are not that strong. Which brings up the question of, is this war going to turn out to be anything worth fighting? Or just, is this going to be a good, is this going to be for a good purpose or not? So everybody starts to get really, really down about the idea that they might not be being able to be young again. But John comes in and says, and tells everybody that the food that they're eating right now is proof that they will become young, because why would the Colonial Defense Force feed them food that will make them less healthy if they're not going to replace these organs that they're screwing up by feeding it to them? And this makes everybody feel better, and it fixes the situation. It returns the mood back to one of good spirits for everybody that's just been like horribly beaten down with what could potentially be the truth. But then John goes back to his room, and so we end on this hopeful feeling. But then eventually John goes back to his room and tries to get Leon to go to his physical, and the guy is dead. Leon, the dude who was being a horrible piece of shit earlier in the day, or actually yesterday, has had a heart attack in his sleep in the time that John was gone for breakfast. So the EMT says he's dead. He's been dead for about an hour. Looks like a heart attack. Poor bastard just made it this far just to have his ticket crap out. So the fascinating thing about this is, if it weren't for the fact that John had gotten into this argument with Leon, there is a very decent chance that Leon would still be alive. He did not want to go to lunch. He did not want to go to breakfast with John because he and John got into an argument and they were having an antagonistic relationship. But if they had still been friends the next day, not that it was a two-sided friendship, but if they had still been friends the next day, would he have gone to breakfast? Would they have been able to call someone when he had a heart attack earlier? Probably. I'm not saying that he would be alive, but his chances would have been better. So I guess we'll see where this goes. So then one of the other officers around makes a joke about Leon's death, and it says, "I shot a hard stare at him. I thought a joke at this moment was in terribly bad taste." So John has told jokes for this entire book at every possible situation, trying to lift the mood. This is the first time that he shows this is the first time that he thinks a joke is a bad idea, and he says so in narration. And this is showing us that we're starting to get a little bit of a chip away at his extreme altruistic. Okay, happy-go-lucky is a little bit of an exaggeration, but he's not. We're seeing a chip at his optimism, and it's definitely going to be a massive hit to everybody else's optimism on this trip, to know that somebody died before they were able to get what it was that they came here for. So yeah, so that's the first 3 chapters of Old Man's War. I'm going to leave this up for a week before I post the next video. So the discussion question for this week, if you are watching this, which I'm not sure anybody is going to be watching this in the first week, is right now in our society, young people join the military and it defines the rest of their lives, and they live their life as a person who is in the military or was in the military. In this society, it's normal for people to join the military after they have lived a full life. How do you think that this would change our society if this were to suddenly happen? All right, see you next week.